Hi everyone, my name is Bailey. Today we'll be going over lesson 2 of beginning JavaScript. Alright, and here's the schedule just as a reminder. Once you get back to class, we have 4:15 is when you start joining in, 5 o'clock to 5:10 is our break. We have icebreakers in the main room. Then 5:15 to 5:45 is when we finish our class. Then we'll join back the next week for lesson 3. Alright, and as a review for lesson 1, we have these 3 questions. I'll read them out loud first. You'll think about how to answer them. Once you have the answer, you can unpause the video and I'll go over the answers for each one. First question is, what is the code for coding rectangles? Second question, how do you get rid of the outline on a shape? Third question, how do you change the color of a shape? So go ahead and pause this video, and once you have the answers, continue. All right, so for that first question, what is the code for coding rectangles? If you recall, a rectangle is one of our shape functions we've learned so far, and we call that by saying rect, then an opening parentheses, 4 parameters, a closing parentheses, and a semicolon. Those 4 parameters are x, y with an height, which stands for the coordinates. The first 2 are the coordinates. Then the last 2 are the size and the actual appearance of the shape. The second question, how do you get rid of the outline on a shape? You would use the no stroke command. Just as a reminder, that is using the capital S, and after you write the word no stroke, again, capital S, you close it with just a pair of parentheses and a semicolon. Third question, how do you change the color of a shape? That's using the fill command, and we can write that by saying fill, an opening parentheses, and it should auto-complete it for you, but if it doesn't, you can also write 3 numbers, which stands for RGB, or red, green, blue, and a closing parentheses and a semicolon. There should be a color picker there for you to make your life easier when you are deciding on a color to manually pick which color you would like from that box. All right, and as a really quick coordinate plane review, it's not the same as our math class coordinate planes, where the origin, or 0, 0, is in the center. Instead, 0, 0 is in the top left corner, and 400, 400 is in the bottom right. This means that our grid is a size of 400 by 400 pixels, and the x-axis, which is anything going horizontal / left to right, is here on the bottom. So that x-axis comes first in the coordinate pair. The y-axis is anything from top to bottom, or a vertical number. And you put those numbers together to give a point. So for example, here we have a question that says, where would 200, 200 be? So 200 is both the value for x and y. And one thing we can note is that because our grid is a size of 400 by 400 pixels, this means 200 is half of 400, or half of the grid. So right here. And you can also say the same thing for the x-axis, where it would be halfway on the y-axis as well. So if we meet that point together, where we say 200 meets over here, and they cross or intersect at the center. So 200, 200 as an x and y coordinate pair would be in the middle, right here, C. And you can apply this logic to any shape you make later on. We'll bring up our car project to work on. Oh, let's get some in. Okay, really quick overview for today's lesson. We'll be creating complex shapes in JavaScript by merging together simpler shapes that we've already learned, like rectangle and circle. All right, so let's break down this shape real quick. Right here on our project screen, we have a car, and it has a green background, a gray road, and the car in the center. To draw the shape by hand, we would first have a background function, right? To color that back. Then we would have that rectangle to actually draw out what the road looks like, and a fill statement to give it a different color. Last of all, we would have 2 rectangles, which represents the top part and then the bottom part of the car, then 2 circles to represent the wheels of our car. So let's move on and see how to add that into our project. And as a quick reminder, we have the background function and no stroke. This is what they actually look like when written out inside of your projects. All right, if you haven't done this already from last week, go ahead and open up your existing program, or open up a new program if you don't already have a car project. You will follow these steps here. So again, create the background and add no stroke so that we have a seamless car that blends in together rather than what looks like 2 rectangles stacked on top of each other. Draw the top and bottom rectangle, draw the 2 wheels, and color them. And if you're finished early, draw a road onto the car. please take this time to go over your code, and if there's any issues, we'll get into it later. But pause this video, work on that project, and when you're ready, unpause it. All right, let's go over the answers. So here I have my car project. Gotta let it load. All right, so at the top here, we just have a general descriptor of what our project is. I'll get into how to really write these out so we know what we're doing inside of our project. From lines 7 to 8 here, we have no stroke and background. This is just, the color, and no stroke gets rid of all the borders on our shapes. Lines 11 to 12, is our road. You can see here by the fill command as well as the comment we leave up here. Rectangle here just stands for the road that we draw. And then going on to 15 to 17, we have the fill command for the car. You can see that this applies to both shapes that comes underneath it. And as a really quick reminder, we can add an optional fifth parameter to act as the radius, or you can see like the roundness of our car. If you look here, our car is a bit rounded on the edges, as it is not as pointed as a normal rectangle would be that we've made in the past. And this you can see here as well. We have an optional radius, and it says the radius of the corners to round the rectangle. When we add the number 5, it rounds the edge by that amount of the radius, and if you increase it, you can see it turns really round, really close to cylindrical looking. You can also do the same if you make it a negative value, where it inverts itself, although at least in this case, we would not be using that. All right, and then the last thing we have here is from lines 20 to 22, we have the car wheels. We fill the wheels a black color. Then we draw those ellipses using the X, Y, W, H parameters. If you have any issues with your project, double check to make sure you have all semicolons and all closing parentheses. One thing that might help is the oh no's error buddy. You might have seen him. It's this guy down here. Let's say, for example, I get rid of a semicolon. You can see here we have an error message that says, oh noes, looks like you're missing a semicolon. And if you click the show me where button, it'll show you the line that is missing. And it won't complete it for you, obviously. It's just a suggestion. Oh, your code has an error. It's not going to work properly, and it won't output. So I'm missing a semicolon. Oh, there's my semicolon. Add that back in. Other things to note, you might have misspelled something or deleted a parameter or even added an extra one. So if you're having any issues, you can double check. And if you really can't figure out what the issue is, save your project, reload, and check with your teacher the next day, or you can send them a message when you get back to class. All right, let's continue from here. Here is a comment. So you saw that earlier in the project where we had those double slashes and the writing was green. So a comment essentially is a line of code that does not function inside of the actual code. This means whatever you write beside a comment doesn't actually affect the code. It doesn't affect any of the output. It is for humans to understand, not for the computer. So look right here, we have an example. / draw a car body, then we have the actual instructions to draw a car body. The double slash tells the computer not to pay attention to this line, that it's for humans to understand. And this just helps us keep our code clean. We can label things, that way we don't have a really long block of code that takes a while to sort through. All right, and then we have a new concept here. So we have variables. Variables are values or strings that we assign to letters or words. And they have to be one word, no spaces, and can be assigned to any number or string. So think of it this way. A variable is like a placeholder box. Let's say, for example, we have a box here and we label it fruits, right? Pardon my handwriting. So we can say this fruits here, it can contain any value. We're going to put the value apple into it because an apple is a fruit. Very similar to how a variable works, a variable stores another value, right? Variable x right here, variable x is equal to 20. So we can set the value, set the variable x to the value of 20. Just the same, we could also set the variable fruits to apples. And this stores the number inside. It's very helpful when we get later on into coding, especially because we can constantly update a number rather than having one stagnant number we can't change. For example, inside of my project, if I just put the number 20, this means it cannot later be updated. If I wanted my car to move to, let's say we wanted it to drive across the screen, to update that number, it would need to be changed later on, but we can't just write, oh, make 20 plus 2 a bunch of times, because it won't update the actual car. We have to use a variable for that to store a number so that it later on can be updated, whether it is inside animation or just changing the size of things. Makes things a lot more accessible, and you might see this very commonly in other programming language as well. Okay, and as a quick review for variables, we're going to just experiment with them. Let's make more variables. Choose a name, and here in the example, we have the name doggo, and we'll choose the value 500. Values can also be words or strings. And really quickly, a string is a bunch of letters or a sentence, up to you, inside a pair of quotation marks. So right here, an example, we have the pairs of quotation marks around a word, and it could also be a sentence. You see right here, I am a flute. And these are all considered strings. Even the sentences are considered strings as long as they are within those two parentheses and they cancel out, like, for example, if you wrote the word tomato inside of a program, the code has no idea what a tomato is until you define it as something. So if we put it inside the string value, or these two quotation marks, it'll say, oh, it is a string, and that is how I will treat it as. And you can assign variables as strings. For example, here we have var doggo equals 500. You could also even put var doggo equals the string 500. The only difference is now it is considered a message rather than a number / integer. All right, let's move on from here. Okay, mini activity. We will name and create a variable, set a variable to 50, and draw an ellipse using your variable. So again, as a reminder, var variable name is equal to value, semicolon. That's how we set up a variable. So go ahead and take this time to create a new project and try out this activity. Unpause the video when you're done and we will continue. All right, here we have the answer. 1, create a variable called x and set it to any value. 2, draw the, oh, is this? Okay, nope, those are not the same thing. All right, I'll go show you guys how this works. My apologies. So I'm gonna work on this project right now. So remember, create a variable. I'm going to set it to var, say var Bailey. I can't think of anything better right now. Var Bailey. And we will set it equal to 50 as the project told us to. Yep. And draw an ellipse using your variable. So to do that, we can say ellipse xy. I'm going to keep that xy and just go ahead and make those numbers I'd like to use. So I'll just do in the middle of the screen, 200, 200. Next thing I'm going to do, instead of writing numbers inside of my next width and height parentheses, I'm going to write the word Bailey. I can't spell it. Bailey, Bailey. Boom. And it works. You can see we have the value 50 is inputted in here. Bailey is essentially a representation of that value, and we can use it as a placeholder later on in our script. Another thing you can even do is you can put it inside of anything that requires a parameter. Parameters, again, are those numbers you put inside of a function to actually output it onto the screen. So for example, I can even give a background and replace one of the numbers with Bailey, and it'll give a different value. The coolest thing I think is a variable will affect all instances you've called on it. So all of these are currently 50, right? Every single Bailey I've written is 50. However, if I change this value from 50 to, let's say, 200. Oh, it's too big, sorry. 200. The width and height of the circle has changed. It has grown bigger. And the value of my background, the RGB values, is different. R now has 200, G has 0, because I haven't given that a variable, and the B value, or blue, is also 200, so it gives this magenta purple color. Very cool. And again, you can also use the slider to change the value of your variable. It doesn't have to be named Bailey. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Experiment with that for a little bit, and once you're ready to move on, there's no issues with your code, unpause the video and we'll continue. Okay, so here is the next activity, very similar vein, where we create a variable called x and set it to any value. Then draw the rectangle x, 50, 50. Oh, okay, so it looks like that is it for the instructions. So I'll actually just go ahead and do that as well. Var x, and x is equal to, let's say, 75. One thing to note, you can see that it's a bit different from how I called my Bailey variable. For my Bailey variable, I said var Bailey is equal to 350. The difference is we are first creating the variable for the x, and then we are assigning a value on the next line. To do that, you can just call on the same variable again, equals, and then the new value. Currently, if I didn't have this, it would have an undefined value and you couldn't call on it anywhere. For my fourth line, or my var Bailey variable, I have Bailey is equal to 50 all in one line, which means I can immediately start using it. You can use a variable after you define it, depending on the circumstances, but generally this is a good practice to keep everything on one line if that is something that can be accommodated. All right. So we'll go back to var x is equal to 50, draw a rectangle rect to x, 50, 50. Let me double check that. Yes, that's correct. And very similar output, where if we change this value, it'll change something based on the wherever I put it inside of my rectangle function. In this case, I put the x in my x and y, which means the x and y both increase and decrease at the same rate. So it slides in this diagonal direction. I'll do that again. So go up and go down. If I change it to, let's say, this can be 50, and we'll change this to x, it changes the different shape and as well as the x location of my rectangle. Where the x value changes it from left to right, you can see that it's not actually going down, it's only getting longer using that fourth parameter, or my height variable. So yeah, experiment with that. If there's any issues, double check that you have everything spelled correctly and end everything with a semicolon. All right, if you're ready to move on, go ahead and unpause this video. Okay, save your project. For everything we've worked on so far today, be sure to save, because JavaScript doesn't actually autosave any of your projects if you recall that from lesson 1. Press the blue save button on the bottom of the page, and if you haven't already, it'll prompt you to name your project. Give it a name that you can remember for what the project is about. For example, your car project, you could label as beginning JavaScript car. All right, the next things we'll be doing in the upcoming lessons, we'll be using variables to control car locations, to move your car and change the coordinates of our wheels and body so they all move together. You can change one variable to make the car move. So as we've seen before, where I had the value x applied to my rectangle, you can use that same variable to apply to all of your shapes. So they all move together and it looks like your car is driving across the screen. So I look forward to that. Thank you so much for being here in this video. Really quickly, let's review a few questions regarding today's concepts. So what symbol is used to comment out the code? Second question, how are variables used to resize shapes? So go ahead and think of the answers. Once you're ready, unpause the video. All right, so the first question, what symbol is used to comment out code? That is the double slashes. So on my keyboard, that's just next to the right shift, and then without shifting for a question mark, just those two slashes right there. You do slash slash and you can write anything you want to clean up your code or organize it. Second question, how are variables used to resize shapes? Variables are used to resize shapes because we can assign them a value, and that value will essentially be a placeholder inside of our function. So inside of a shape rectangle, we could have an x value and assign that to the variable banana. And if banana is equal to 50, we can actually have that rectangle's value be 50, but it'll go through the variable first. And as you'll see, that can also be applied in animation. So look forward to that in the next lessons. If you are in the fall session or spring session, we also have the Tuesday and Sunday office hours. Those are from 4:15 to 5:15 on Tuesdays and Sundays. Again, those Pacific time, for those of you that are not in that area. And the Zoom meeting ID is 955-355-1000. You can find this information also with your senior mentors or even teachers that you've contacted. And if you need any help, feel free to reach out to us at sendclass@gmail.com. All right, thank you so much for coming today, guys, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Take care and continue programming in your JavaScript journey.